What I would like to do at this time now is to give you 3 sets of numbers. You need to have a piece of paper and write these down. I will give you the percentages of 2 of the soil separates, and I would like you to go to the textural triangle that is included in your packet, your handout on this particular unit, and determine what the textural class name for each of these soils would be. The first soil, we'll call it soil number 1, is 70% sand sized particles and 21% silt sized particles. So for soil 1, go to the triangle, determine where the 70% sand and 21% silt sized particles, where those 2 lines will intersect, and determine the textural class name. Soil number 2 is 20% sand and 65% silt. And the third example, which we'll call soil number 3, is 80% sand and 15% silt. So what I'd like you to do now is take a few minutes with your handout on the soil textural triangle, determine the textural class name for each of these example soils, and then I'll come back and go through these with you on the triangle to make sure we're all reading this soil textural triangle correctly. Okay, let's take a look at our first soil. Our first soil was 70% sand and 21% silt. So we're looking on the sand axis, which starts at 0% here and runs to 100% in the lower left-hand corner. We had 70% sand, so we're going to be on this line somewhere. If it has 70% sand on it, it must fall somewhere on this line. The other number I gave you was 21% silt. That's just really close to the 20% line, slightly past. We follow the 20% silt line down to where it intersects with the 70% sand, and we fall here well within the sandy loam category, almost just a little bit left to the center of the sandy loam category. So our correct answer for the first soil, example soil number 1, should be a sandy loam soil. Soil example number 2 was 20% sand and 65% silt. Our 20% sand line runs from here all the way up. Our percentage silt is 65%, so it's halfway between the 60 and 70, approximately right in there. We run down to where we intersect with the 20% sand, and we fall out here in the middle of the silt loam category. So our correct textural class name for soil number 2 is a silt loam. The final example, soil number 3, was 80% sand and 15% silt. 80% sand would run from this line from here up to here. So it has to fall over here in this lower left-hand corner with 80% sand. 15% silt is going to be halfway between the 10 and the 20%. So we follow down through the middle of this line to where it intersects with the 80% sand, and it's going to fall here into the loamy sand category. So we're going to be about right there on the textural triangle, which is inside, well within the loamy sand textural class name. So that would be how you utilize the soil textural triangle. Given any 2 percentages of sand, silt, or clay separates, you should be able to determine the textural class name of the soil. One other thing that I need to point out about this textural triangle, and it's not just the textural triangle, but it's about textural class names for soils. One would think that if you knew the textural class name for a soil, meaning that if you had 2 soils that were both silt loams, that these soils would be very similar in terms of their physical attributes. However, that is not necessarily going to be the case. And I think if we look at the example I just used, the silt loam category, every soil falling within this box is going to be a silt loam. Well, what percentage range of sand can be in a silt loam soil? Well, we're looking at this, and it could be clear down here at 10% sand, or even 0 technically in this corner, but we're saying we could have a range of 0 up to almost 50% sand-sized particles, and it could still be in the silt-loam textural class. Range of silt could be from approximately 50, this line right here, down to and including 100%. So 0 to 50 on sand, 50 to 100% on silt puts it into the silt-loam category. And we go over to the clay axis. 0 is here, and we read up, and we see that we could go up to about 26 or 27% clay, because that's the upper limit of the silt-loam category, is about 26 or 27% clay. This brings out a good point. Loam soils do not have equal percentages of sand, silt, and clay. If we look at the loam textural class, it sets in the lower center of the triangle. Loam soils will have a proportionately higher percentage of silt and sand than they do clay. And I think we could say that for about any soil out here that has loam in the textural class name. As we progress up the triangle, get into the clay loam soils, well, clay loam soils are going to have from about 27 or 28% clay up to about 40% clay. Anytime we get above approximately, I would say approximately 26% clay, clay will be in the textural class name of that soil somewhere. Sandy clay loam, silty clay, etc. Why do we need a lower percentage of clay in the soil than we do silt and sand-sized particles to get clay in the textural class name? Well, the reason for that is that clay, being smaller sized particles, will impart a greater influence upon the surface relationships in the soil than will the sand and silt-sized particles correspondingly. That is to say, as we reduce the size of the individual particles, we will increase the amount of surface area in a given volume of soil.